All right. So, considering it's permissible to light the Chanukah menorah with the power of fire, called electricity, which harnesses machines to illuminate homes and shops, there is reason to forbid it. Since the miracle occurred with oil and wicks, and here there's only light and no active flame. Obviously, electricity is a new thing. A light bulb was a relatively new invention when he's writing this. He passed away in 1939. I don't have the date for when he answered this question, but it was in the early 20th century, and therefore, his explanation of how light bulbs work is a little interesting as well. But what is more, the menorah in the Holy Temple was kindled by a person, not a machine. Finally, the light bulbs give off such a strong light, they are akin to a torch, which wouldn't be kosher even if we use candles. So he brings a number of reasons, but what makes his one unique, as he says, the menorah is not like if you have an electric menorah and you're turning on lights, then essentially you're doing something that looks and feels very, very different from the actual original menorah that was kindled in the temple, in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, and therefore, how could you possibly try and commemorate this miracle if you're doing a completely different act that isn't connected to the first one? Yes.
Sorry if I missed this, but in Jewish belief, is this a mitzvah or a requirement that you light the menorah? Like, if I don't light it, is that considered a sin?
So from the point of view of Judaism, I mean, a mitzvah, it's interesting because mitzvah literally means commandment. So this is not a commandment from God per se, because it's a rabbinic holiday. There was no Chanukah when the Torah was given. There was no Chanukah during the first temple period. It only came about later on. But the Torah gives the rabbis the ability to enact various, rules and commemorations and celebrations and things like that. And one of the rabbinic mitzvahs, there are 7 commandments that the rabbis gave to the Jewish people as 7 kind of pillars of Jewish practice that they added to the 613 commandments. Chanukah is one of them. So it would be a rabbinic commandment, but we take rabbinic commandments seriously. I mean, that's what Judaism is. Judaism is the Torah given by God to the Jewish people, and then how we've practiced it over the years and the various edicts the rabbis have. So like washing your hands before bread would be another thing that the rabbis instituted for everybody. But it is, I don't want to say a sin, but it's definitely, it is a very good thing. It's a positive thing that we can all do by lighting the menorah, and we have an obligation to do so. And we have menorahs here as well, so everyone should be able to do it no matter where you go, even if you're going on vacation after this or wherever it is, taking some time off. So, but yeah, so the first thing over here is to light the menorah. We need to make sure that the Kaf HaChaim, this rabbi feels that it would be important to look like the menorah in the temple. The next one, which is a very interesting approach, is the question is if there is enough fuel in the menorah when you light it. Why? We're going to see over here the kind of basic explanation in the Code of Jewish Law of what it takes to light a menorah properly. And through that, it presents an interesting question about how to properly kindle the menorah. So the kind of the debate that's going on in the Talmud and is brought in the Jewish law is what is the mitzvah of Chanukah? Is it to light the candles, or is it to place the menorah in the windowsill or in the doorway, wherever your custom is to put it? And the act of kind of putting it there and having it there, that's the actual kind of key that you turn to be able to turn it on and fulfill your obligation. Which one is it? And the answer is that it's the kindling itself. Where's the difference between this placing and kindling, whatever it is? So we see over here, the kindling accomplishes the mitzvah and not the placement. To wit, if the menorah was sitting in place, not for the purpose of a Chanukah mitzvah, one may light it there and does not need to remove it and replace it for the purpose of a Chanukah mitzvah. So let's say you have your menorah, you take your Tekshet menorah, you bring it home, you set it up, you light it this year. Next year comes, it's been sitting in the windowsill the whole year. You got busy, it looks nice, it's part of the decorations, gives some ambiance to the room, and you leave the menorah in place and you put some new candles in. That would be kosher. You wouldn't have to pick it up and say, hey, I want to place this down here. No, the menorah, wherever it's placed, is good, and it could sit there the whole year. If you had, for example, some sort of, decoration in the wall where you could just drop candles in, even if it's there the whole year, it doesn't have to be specifically made. As long as you have the candles in place and you're lighting it for the purpose of the mitzvah, you're doing what you need to do. Therefore, if a lamp was burning all day and was kindled on the Sabbath Eve for the Chanukah mitzvah, after the Sabbath one extinguishes it and rekindles it for the purpose of the mitzvah. So the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is writing before there are electric lights. So you have a really big candle full of an oil lamp, and you put a ton of oil in there, and you want it to burn the entire Shabbat because you don't want it to be dark, right? You don't want it to be dark Friday night, and you don't want it to be dark, Saturday night also. You want to make sure that you have light at both times. So you set up your candle with a ton of oil. You light it before Chanukah starts, before Shabbat. Shabbat ends. That night, after Shabbat ends, it's now Chanukah. And you have this oil burning the whole time. You'd have to extinguish the light, put out the fire, light the fire again, but your sitting jug of oil there that was burning the entire time is fine and good to go. And as long as you've extinguished it and lit it for the purpose of the mitzvah, you did your obligation. So the second paragraph in here. So this is, you can't use the Chanukah light for any for any purpose of benefit. Yes, that's true. So once Chanukah starts, that's why we have the shamash, the lighter candle. We keep it there because you're not supposed to have any benefit from it. You're not supposed to use it to count coins. This is, by the way, a hint to playing dreidel in the Talmud, because that's not discussed either. But they say, that you're counting your money. Why do you be counting your money? Because you're playing dreidel, you're winning some money. You want to count it. But in any event, you're not using the flames for any personal benefit. You're using it only for the mitzvah. But before Shabbat starts, it's not even Chanukah yet, that you're using to be able to see. Once Shabbat ends, now you maybe added an additional light or whatever it is, and you have your menorah light that's sitting there that you could use. So the second thing over here is that there's an opinion that says that since the kindling accomplishes the mitzvah, one needs to put the proper measure of oil in the light before kindling. But if he recited the benediction and kindled and afterwards added oil up to the proper measure, he has not fulfilled his obligation. So what happens if you have this big lamp, right, and it's empty? There's really no oil in there, or there's just a drop, just enough to light the wick, and then it'll go out within 2 minutes, and it needs to burn for half an hour to be able to fulfill the obligation. So if you light this light, and then you quickly say, "Oh shoot, I don't have enough oil here," and you pour some oil in there, and now suddenly it's been filled up to the required amount to last long enough. Is that good? And the answer is no, it's not. Because when you light the menorah, you need to have the entire energy source that you're going to use to fill the mitzvah in place at that time, at that moment. And therefore, this is why electricity would be an issue, as we'll see. Question or no? So, this is from Response Zahar Tzvi. So Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank was an Ashkenazi rabbi who was born in Lithuania and lived in Israel, passed away in Jerusalem in 1960. So he says, concerning the law in Shulchan Aruch that we just read now, that there needs to be enough fuel for the menorah to burn for the prerequisite amount of time before lighting. It's pertinent when considering if you can fill the obligation with an electric menorah. When you light this menorah, there's no fuel immediately available for it to burn. The menorah must constantly draw its power from the power station. The result is that the act of kindling is lost. So that the issue that he takes with an electric menorah is that if you have an electric menorah and you're going to turn it on, so besides the fact that you don't really have that kindling action, you're just flipping a switch, what are you doing? The menorah itself doesn't have enough fuel. It has to be connected to the circuit, and the circuit has to go all the way back to the power station, which goes back to the generator, however it's producing electricity, and therefore you don't have on hand in the menorah enough electricity for the menorah to work. In theory, if the power to go out, your menorah would die, right? So, and you have to make sure that when you say the blessing, there's enough, power in the menorah, oil or candles, right, that'll last the right amount of time. So therefore, this is his reason for saying it doesn't work, that it simply just doesn't have the fuel on hand. So if you think about that answer, you have to have all the power on hand, then there's an interesting workaround that might make an electric menorah work. This is from Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, another great decisor of Jewish law, passed away in 1995. So he says there's reason to differentiate between electricity, which originates from the power station, where there's concern that it constitutes lighting without the prerequisite amount of oil, since it requires constant flow from the power station, as opposed to turning on a battery-powered menorah, which already has all the electricity in a single place. At that point in time, one might even theoretically be able to make a blessing. So he says, 1 second, if your whole issue with the menorah is that it has to have all the electricity there, so if it's plugged into the wall, you don't have any electricity on hand, right? But if you have a battery, right, you have a battery-powered menorah, you put the batteries in there, shouldn't that work? That you're able to go around with the battery-powered menorah, you have all your electricity on hand, and you're good to go. So this is the second issue, right? The first one is that it's not that an electric menorah is too far removed from the miracle and what happened to kind of commemorate it. The second one is that you need to have the electricity on hand. So then maybe, according to this opinion, you might be able to use batteries. And the final question is the issue of a flame versus a torch. My glasses on.
Would each candle need its own battery?
Right, that's a good question. So that would probably, as we'll see, no, that won't be necessary. That in theory, if you had a battery, which I should say now, if like anyone tunes out now, whatever it is you shouldn't use a battery menorah either. But as we'll get to, I just want to make sure that I have this paranoia that someone's going to log off, go out for lunch, and then they're gonna. But in theory, each candle would not need its own battery, as we'll get to in a moment. So the final issue is a flame versus a torch. So this again goes back to the Talmud and Shabbat, where it speaks about Chanukah, and they ask a question: what happens if you have a big bowl of oil and you put a wick in it and you light it? You have a menorah, right? Menorah doesn't have to look, with kind of the arms. We just do that because we want to make our menorahs look like the menorahs in the temple and kind of commemorate that special mitzvah. But it doesn't need to have that. You have kind of the traditional Ashkenazi menorah actually is like a bar-shaped thing with a wall behind it. There's all kinds of different shapes. In theory, if you had a bowl and you stuck a wick in it, it would be good. Now, what happens if it's a big bowl? You want to put a lot of wicks in there, right? Could you just drop 8 wicks on the last night in your bowl of oil, light each of the 8 wicks, and now you have a menorah that's all just drawing from the same bowl? So this is the answer. So Rava says, one who has filled a bowl with oil and places wicks all around it, if you overturn the vessel on top of it, it is considered to have fulfilled the obligation of lighting the Chanukah light for several people, corresponding to the number of wicks. So let's say you have 4 guests over, you don't have any menorahs, and you put 4 wicks inside of it, and you put some sort of plate on top of it or something that covers up the oil so that each wick is now separated. They're not all drawing directly. You can't see the same source, right? Each one kind of has a little bit of differentiation from the other one. So it doesn't look like they're all kind of one massive, flame. Then it would be kosher. By overturning a vessel atop the bowl, each wick appears to be burning independently. If one did not overturn a vessel on top of it, he thereby makes it appear like a type of bonfire. But if you have a bunch of flames all going at once, and they're all just kind of drawing from the same bowl, and there's nothing that keeps them kind of separate from each other, then it looks like you don't have a candle burning. Now you have a bonfire, you have a torch, you have something that has an immense amount of light, and that would not be kosher. From afar, the light from all the flames appears to be a single flame, and is not even considered to fulfill the obligation of lighting the Chanukah for one person, because the mitzvah is specifically to light a flame and not a bonfire. So we see something over here when it comes to the flames that we have, that each one has to look independent and cannot look like something that has an immense amount of light, like a torch or a bonfire. It has to look like a single candle that, there's a lot of power in candles, but also something that easily be blown out and has a little bit of that ephemeral nature to it. And therefore, that's why in theory, if you had batteries, and the batteries, each candle would not need its own battery because they can all draw from the same source. But we have to make sure that the lights aren't so bright that they become like a bonfire or a torch. And this is the final issue with an electric menorah. There's no doubt that an electric menorah is not a problem due to the lack of resemblance to the menorah in the Holy Temple. This is from Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, another important halachic opinion of this past century, passed away in 2006. So he said that, what's our first issue? Our first issue is it doesn't look like the temple. That's not really a very strong issue. If we rule that all the candles and wicks are kosher for Chanukah, because in the Talmud itself it says you don't have to specifically use oil. Olive oil is only considered the optimal way to light the menorah, but not to the exclusion of other means. Thus, we see today that many have the custom to use wax candles, right? Most people today will use a wax candle. If you have the option of doing an olive oil menorah, it's even more beautiful, even more special, but you could use a candle that's kosher. And the menorah in the Holy Temple did not have wax candles, it had oil. So we see that even the way we do the mitzvah now, it doesn't really look like the menorah in the temple. If so, an electric menorah shouldn't be a problem, since the main mitzvah is that there should be candles that are kindled, and through that the miracle is shared. But he says he has another issue. However, where I have an issue with an electric menorah is that the light emanating from the glass bulbs is like a torch, since the arc-shaped filament in an incandescent bulb is closer to the light of a torch than a single flame. But the issue over here is that when you have a light bulb shines a lot brighter than a single candle. If you've ever lit up a room with a candle, a single candle can illuminate the room, right? But it has a very different quality of light versus a torch. And a light bulb, especially because of the shape of a filament, if you have like a neon light or an LED, that would be even further removed. There's no real fire going over there from any type of halachic sense, so that would not be kosher, no matter what. But with a light bulb where you have an incandescent light bulb and you have that filament which is getting hot and burning and glowing, so the problem is that light looks like a torch's light. And the fact that it kind of arches over, it doubles over, so it creates an issue. So that's why it wouldn't be good. Just in terms of the kind of the practical solution is really, as much as possible, you should light, not as much as possible. In order to do the mitzvah, to make a blessing, do it properly, you need to light a candle, menorah with candles, with oil or with, or candles, we have a flame. People get nervous because they have cats and apartments and things like that. You could kitchen sink if you want. You could take in the kitchen sink. You could put tea lights that are mostly submerged in water. There are all kinds of ways if you want to be really creative to be able to have that fire burning and do it properly. Now, there are some exceptions. If a person, God forbid, is in the hospital, right, or maybe an astronaut in outer space, or I don't know, whatever the different things are, where you really, you are unable to have a fire going in any sense whatsoever for many, many complicated reasons. At that point in time, you could talk to a rabbi. I guess you can call me if you want as well, but you talk to a rabbi and you can figure out how to use possibly battery-operated menorah in an emergency situation. That is not the norm. So to be able to do it, we have all the menorahs here and people can light it. But there's a kind of a final thing over here. This is a saying from the 6th Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak of Lubavitch. He said we must listen to the lights, for each one tells a story, that the power of the flame, the message of Hanukkah is one that I think becomes even stronger today, where we have other forms of light as opposed to just a flame light. I mean, if you ask me, and this is just my kind of own thought process over here, but 150 years ago, 200 years ago, before there was electricity, so you lit a menorah, it could look like any other lamp you have in your home, right? Everyone had flames going in order to have light. The menorah didn't feel special, didn't say something unique. It could have been like any other lamp that you used to bring light. Now, today, when everything is through electricity and all the lights that we have in our day-to-day lives are from, incandescent bulbs or LEDs or neon lights or whatever is going on, suddenly when you light a flame, it says something different. It says something bold. It creates more of a statement and gives more power to the message of Hanukkah and to the message of each light than anything else. And ultimately, one of the messages of Hanukkah is that there was a small jar of oil that was found, and everything else around it was impure. That in our own lives we could feel overwhelmed. Sometimes, in the day-to-day grind of things, we can feel estranged from our duties and we could feel afraid. We could be, should be nervous or whatever. And when you find that jar of oil, there's a point within each and every one of us that is always pure and is always holy and always good. And if we get in touch with it, then we can bring enough light, not just for one night, but for full 8 nights. So we know 8 nights represents beyond nature, the cycle of a week. A week represents sunrise, sunset, 7 days a week. It's the cycle of nature, the flow of nature. 8 represents something beyond nature. We can get in touch with the transcendent and supernatural part within our souls and be able to bring that to create miracles in our own lives. So that is kind of the message of Hanukkah. I want to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. And please, any questions, thoughts, comments, favorite latke, toppings, or whatever it is, let me know.